28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. Today, if you've got your Bibles, we will be in the Book of Ruth. In the Book of Ruth, which is right after the Book of Judges, but right before 1 Samuel. We're going to kind of take a trip back in time today. But with that being said, today we'll have a similar theme as we'll next week as was 2 Sundays ago. I want to again say thank you to Jacob for preaching last week. You did a great job, buddy. I appreciate it. Thank you for all that you do for our church and especially for our students. So the 3 messages that we've done here recently, one, as Joe reminded us this morning in 1 Samuel, we talked about Hannah and Hannah's prayer. Today we're going to be looking at the story of Ruth. And next week we'll be looking at Esther. So we've kind of got in the middle of this, we've got 3 weeks looking at specifically stories with the major character is a woman, which is awesome. And so that's why we kind of want to collect these together. So Ruth historically takes place during the book of Judges, okay? So I know the last time we were together doing our Through the Bible series, we talked about the kings, the period of the kings. So Ruth takes place right before that. So in the middle of that Judges cycle, if you remember, the Judges cycle is sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance, and peace. And so really what we'll see today is the story of Ruth is in some sense a microcosm of the entire book of Judges and how God works in and through. Now I'm going to be honest with you today. We're going to read a verse from chapter 1 and then from chapter 4, and then we'll kind of land in the middle in chapters 2 and 3, okay? Because that's kind of the meat of the story where I want to hit today. I'll be honest with you, though. If you didn't read 1 Samuel, that's okay. Don't worry about it. You can read Ruth and or Esther this week. But when you do, let me caution you, you will not see God mentioned rarely, if at all. In fact, God will not speak. There is no, and the Lord said in either of those books. But what I would challenge you to do is, as you're reading them, to see God's hand and God working behind the scenes. We're going to talk more about this next week. We'll talk a little bit about it today, but next week we'll kind of hone in on that more about God's behind the scenes work. So, as I said, the story of Ruth is about takes place in the time of the Judges and really deals with one family. I'm going to kind of summarize the story and then we'll kind of get into the verses. Here's what happens. There's a mom and a dad, Naomi and, I forgot his name. Starts with an E. Anyway. Elimelech. Thank you. I was like Eli Melech, but that's not right. That's the way I wanted to come out. Elimelech. Anyway, his name means God is king. Okay? And Elimelech and Naomi, they live in a place called Bethlehem. Now, this is important. You need to know this. Bethlehem, the town of Bethlehem, if you break the word apart into Beth and Lehem, it means house of bread. Okay? House of bread. So, my God is king, lives in the house of bread. All right? That's important because in the house of bread, there was no bread. Right? There's a severe famine in the land. And Elimelech takes Naomi and his 2 sons, and they go to Moab. This is huge. Moab. Now, Moab, or the Moabites, and the Israelites, of whom Elimelech and Naomi are a part of, they really don't like each other. They somewhat tolerate each other at best. The Moabites are descendants of Lot, and just being honest here today, an incestuous relationship with one of his daughters. And they do not follow the Lord at all. In fact, they worship a pagan deity named Chemosh, and who, in their worship of Chemosh, among other things, they did child sacrifice and did not have any regard for the Lord. At times, the Israelites and the Moabites, even though they were technically cousins, got along, and at other times there was great enmity between them. In fact, I believe in the book of Judges, one of the oppressors of Israel during that cycle is, in fact, the Moabites, right? And so there's this love-hate relationship. As one of a kid, he wasn't in our youth ministry yet. I think he was a 5th grader. back in Athens, he said they were frenemies. And I said, what does that mean? I never heard that word at this time. And he said, well, we're friends, but we're enemies at the same time. That doesn't make sense, I know, but that is the relationship of the Israelites and the Moabites. They fought, and then they're okay. They fought, and then they're okay. They fought, and then all that kind of stuff. And so Elimelech leaves the house of bread, because there is no bread, to go down to Moab, where God is not worshipped, and he sets up residence there because they have food, right? In the process of time, his two sons, his only two sons, get married. When they get married, tragedy happens. Not because they got married. Just put that out there. But it happens, right? Tragedy happens. And it's really bad, okay? So listen to me. Elimelech dies. Then the oldest son dies. And then the youngest son dies. So all of the men in the family die tragically. We don't really know how they die. The Bible just tells us that they died. And so you have Naomi, Ruth, and Naomi's other daughter-in-law who are all living together. Now this is a tragic situation. In this day, in the day of Ruth, this is an awful situation. There is no equality among genders. Basically, ladies, unfortunately, you needed a man in your life for everything. So Naomi does the sensible thing in her mind and says, hey girls, I want you to go back. You've been awesome daughter-in-laws, but I cannot let you. We will all be destitute. You need to go back and live with your fathers again. Because that was a respectable thing to do. If their husbands died, they could go back and live with their dad, and they could honorably be remarried again, and that would provide for them. Naomi, then, her plan was to go back to Bethlehem and fall on the mercy of someone in her extended family to take care of her, because realistically, that's the only chance she had. One of the daughter-in-laws says, deuces, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. That's a great plan, Naomi. I love you. You've been a great mother-in-law, but I'm gone. I can't do this. On the other hand, Ruth takes a very different pattern. And if you're in chapter 1, verse 17, read along with me really quickly. Here are the words of Ruth. Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. Listen to this. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. I want to take just a moment. I'm not going to chase this rabbit long, although this is a worthy rabbit to chase. This is like a nice big one here, okay? If you want to know in a real context what gospel transformation looks like, this is it. Okay? Here's what I mean. I think it was, oh man, his name escapes me. One great Christian writer during the period of Germany, when Germany was under Nazi control, and they were putting a lot of, obviously, Jews and other people in concentration camps. They also did it to staunchly conservative Christians as well. And one famous Christian writer, author, was put in a concentration camp and died tragically days before the Allied forces rescued it and set him free. But here was his words, and we see this in the story. His words were, Christ calls a man, he calls him to come and die. You think about that for a minute. That's kind of harsh. When Christ calls a man, I'm paraphrasing loosely, when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. But really, that's what we see in this story. Right, in this story, in Ruth's words, we see what it means to follow Jesus and what gospel transformation looks like. A couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think we quoted Romans 12:2, and it says, don't be conformed to the image, don't be pressed into the mold, but be transformed. That word there is metamorphosis, like the caterpillar changes into the butterfly, and that is literally what you see here. Think about it. Ruth grew up in a pagan, ungodly world. That's all she ever knew. And what does she say in verse 17? hey, Naomi, bid me not to leave. I don't want to leave. I don't want to go. Where you go, I'll go. What you do, I will do. Like, I'll follow after you. Your God will now be my God. Man, if you ever wanted to know what the gospel looks like in real terms, this is it. This is it. All right, moving on. When Naomi and Ruth, so it's them two, they go back to Bethlehem. When they go back to Bethlehem, they hit, the timing is actually rather good. Surprisingly, right? They hit Bethlehem right as the barley harvest is taking place, which the Bible leads us to believe that the timing is that the famine now that was is over. Okay? So they've had a good harvest. And so they come back to Bethlehem, Elimelech's ancestral home, and so they're around their people, so to speak. Or not their people, but Naomi's people. She knows folks. The community probably rallies somewhat around her, but still, she is very dependent on the mercy of everybody else around her. And so as the barley harvest is going on, in the Old Testament time, God had laid out a kind of a way for people in Naomi and Ruth's situation to be taken care of. What would happen is, as the barley harvesters or the grain harvesters were coming in, they would not clear cut the field completely. They would leave portions of the corners of the field for people in their situation, so that Ruth and Naomi could go out there and they could cut the grain and then they could take that home. Also, when they were bundling the grain up into shocks and putting them to dry out, if anything fell, they didn't gather that up either, right? That was for the poor and the destitute to come and gather. And so Naomi knows this tradition, and so she tells Ruth, hey, look, you hungry? I'm hungry. We got to have some food. I want you to go out to a field, and I want you to glean some barley for us so we can have something to eat. Well, Ruth goes out, and she just happens to find this guy's field, and his name is Boaz. Now, you need to remember that name because he's a main character in the story. And the Bible tells us, we'll come back to this in chapter 2, verse 1, that Boaz is a man of worthy character. You need to remember that phrase. It'll be very crucial later on. Worthy character. Well, Boaz meets Ruth, and he's like, hey, she looks kind of like, hey. Right? You know, y'all remember that moment, right? Hey. Right? And they kind of hit it off, so to speak, in today's language. And so Boaz kind of learns their situation, and Boaz goes even further beyond what is typically required and customary of him, such that he asks his own barley pickers to leave more grain for Ruth than they should. So she comes back, not with this is the picture I get. I did this summer last summer with tomatoes. I would run out of a bucket, I didn't have enough buckets, so I'd flip my shirt up and it's a great picture, I know, right? But I'd come in and I'd tumble tomatoes out, and Holly would be like, oh my God, what are we going to do with all these? We've only got 14 other buckets of tomatoes, right? And so that's kind of the picture, I think, is the first time Ruth goes in and she's like, here, and they're all like, oh man, this is amazing. But then when Boaz kind of takes a liking to her and tells everybody that she can't get in the door, and then Naomi's like, this is such a blessing of the Lord, and that's kind of how the story progresses. Well, as we go on, Naomi realizes she ended up in Boaz's field, and she's like, this is awesome, because Boaz was a member of their family. And not only was he a member of their family, he was an eligible bachelor in their family. You kind of see how this is starting to, happen, to weave together, happen in air quotes, right? And so now Naomi, they kind of put this plan together, and as Boaz and Ruth spend more time together in chapter 3. Remember what I said you need to remember from chapter 2? Well, here it comes up again in chapter 3, because Boaz tells Ruth, man, you're a woman of worthy character. You need to remember that. We're going to talk about it later in a minute, right? And so this plan works, and Boaz realizes that he can actually be what's called the kinsman redeemer for Ruth and Naomi. Now, here's why that's important. Because in Israelite custom and law, God had prescribed a way for a man's family lineage not to die. All right? And what would happen is, in this case, Elimelech died, and his 2 sons died, and there was no person to carry on their family name. So God allowed a way for another relative in the family to marry one of the widows and have a child in the other person's name. Right? You with me so far? It seems a little odd today. I'm going to be honest. No kidding. But that was their culture, not ours. Right? Actually, seriously, I knew of a situation where this did happen. At a church that I worked at, a guy had a brother. Brother tragically died very young in his marriage to his wife. His wife had kids already. And so the brother stepped up and said, hey, I'll take care of you. And they ended up getting married. It worked. I'm not saying it's for everybody, right? But it worked, right? And so Boaz realizes, hey, I have an obligation. I have a right. I have the ability. I like Ruth. She's pretty. She's a worthy woman. Everybody knows it in the community. And guess what? I'm going to do this. And so through an amazing set of circumstances, Boaz is able to marry Ruth, and then they have a kid. And his kid's name, it's a terrible name, I must admit, it's Obed. But read with me, beyond his name, read with me the last few verses of Ruth chapter 4. All right? Ruth chapter 4. Here we go. 4:14 and following. Here's what it says. This is the women in the community are saying this to Naomi. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, listen to this, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him, that being Obed. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. Now listen to this last line. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Wow. So Boaz and a non-Jewish widow, Ruth, were the great-grandparents of David. And let me just kind of stretch this out a little bit further. Who on down the road comes from the line of David? Jesus. Wow. But think about that. Jesus' ancestral line includes somebody who shouldn't even be in there. Sounds like some of us in this room, right? I'm not trying to be funny. I'm including myself. That's why I said us. Me. Like, some of us probably shouldn't be in, quote unquote, shouldn't be in the family of God. But guess what? We are. Why? Because of his grace. And we didn't do it. Ruth didn't do anything. She was just there. She happened to be in the right field. And Boaz happened to be eligible. And he happened to like her. Like, happened. You kind of see there's more to the story than just happened, right? As you'll see as you read Esther this week, right, Pastor Jeff? Just read ahead. You don't want to read Esther this week. You'll see that too, right? So the question I had to ask, that's kind of the story. And man, it's a great story. It's like one of the Hallmark movies, you know. Holly and I were sitting on the couch the other day, and she was cutting tomatoes for potato salad, and I was going outside and said, hey, what do you want to watch? A Hallmark movie? She was like, well, yeah. I was like, well, that's what you've been watching lately. We're like, Hallmark movies. So you're so emotional. And I was like, what? Whatever. Anyway, she watched a Hallmark movie. I went and did something outside. Photographed, did something. So as I was studying this, and then as I was looking at this story, I had to ask myself the question, like I do a lot, okay, what the story's great, and there's a lot of good, and we can see God's hand, and like I said, we're going to talk about more than that. But what do we get out of the way? What does this story have to do with our life, 21st century, where culture's different, and things are different? And ultimately, like I said, we could look at the underlying hand of God and all that. And again, we'll do that next week. But today I want to focus on the two characters, Boaz and Ruth. And remember that phrase I told you to remember? What was it? Worthy character. Now, your Bible honestly may say something a little bit different. I think one translation says noble character. If you've got a King James Bible, when it's talking about Boaz, it may say a mighty man of wealth. And then for Ruth, she may be called a virtuous woman. The reality is the phrasing is very, very, very similar. Okay? Phrasing is very similar. And I want to read you a quote here. I don't do this often, but I want to read you directly from a quote. Because the question I had is, okay, that's obviously important because the author says it in chapter 2, verse 1, and chapter 3, verse 11, that Boaz is a man of worthy character, and then Boaz says that Ruth is a woman of worthy character. So what does that mean? So as I was doing some study, here's I think, a great explanation of this. This comes from author, Old Testament scholar Daniel Block, and here's what he says. When the author speaks of Boaz in the simplest sense, he is showing that Boaz is a man of substance. I love this, he is wealthy in character, not a run-of-the-mill Israelite. And when Boaz speaks of Ruth, listen to this, he is saying she is known throughout the community as a person of honorable character. Think about that. Boaz is wealthy in character, and Ruth is known throughout the community as a person of character. Right? So the next question I had to ask is, okay, why is this important? Before, how did the community know that Ruth was a person of character, and how did they know that Boaz was a person of character? Because I think the story lends to two things. We'll get there in a minute. But first I had to ask, why is this important? And remember what time period we're in, okay? In the chronology of the Bible, remember what time period. The Book of Judges. If you just came out of reading the Book of Judges, which I hope you did, and we talked about it for 2 Sundays, what was one of the things among many that you see lacking, especially as you get to the end of Judges? People of character. I mean, again, you read the end of the Book of Judges, it is atrocious. It is horrific. It's bad. And then right on the heels of this, what do you have? 2 people living in the middle of this horrific time period who were both known as people of character. Again, chasing a rabbit. This is another good one, right? What should that tell us in today's culture? No matter, listen, I tell my oldest son, I tell Tucker this all the time. No matter how bad everybody else is, you do the right thing whether anybody else does it or not. Right? What should that tell us as adults? No matter how bad culture gets, and the reality is, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better, and it ain't going to get better till hopefully all of us are in heaven, right? But until that time, just expect it to probably get worse. But even if it does, what does this story tell us? We don't have to be like everybody else. We can still be people of character, right? So why is it important? I think it's time period. And remember the calling. Remember the calling of Israel to be a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. Why is it important for us? Why are we going to look at this one idea? Because God's called us to be the same way. I thought of a few things last night as I was looking over my notes. Remember in Luke, I believe it is, chapter 2, I think, when Luke is talking about Jesus growing up, and he has that little scenario in the temple where his parents lose him. How do you lose Jesus? I don't know, but they lost him, right? And at the end of that statement, here's what it says. Jesus grew in stature with God. Jesus grew in stature and in favor with God and man. You know what that means? He's a person of character in the community, right? Jesus said to his disciples in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, let your light shine so that they may see your good works and give glory to God. In other words, that means the community should see what you do and realize you're a Christ follower. Jesus again tells his disciples right before he was arrested in the upper room, he says, and they will know that you are my disciples by the way you, 11 at this point, love one another. In other words, the community should know that you follow me because of the way you love each other. Paul says this to leaders in the church. He says you should be above reproach. That means whenever somebody hears your name as a leader in the church, they should say, I believe they did that. If it's a good thing, they never do that if it's something off the wall crazy. Because your character is such that it is above reproach. The Bible is replete with examples of the community noticing a difference in the followers of God. And not only that, historically speaking, the early church grew the way that it did majoritively because of how they treated the other believers, how they treated women, widows, and orphans. Majority, you want to know where the community of Christians grew most rapidly historically from the beginning? The poor, the destitute, the widows, the orphans, and among women. You want to know why? Because unfortunately, ladies, you were treated horribly in the first century. And because of the way Christ followers treated those groups of people, people who weren't Christ followers said, whatever they got, I want it. Because they're different than everybody else. And so the church grew. And so why is this idea of worthy character so important in the context of Ruth and in Judges and in our day? It's because that's who God has created us to be as his followers. He's created us to be people of character. So why did the community view Ruth and Boaz as people of wealthy character? I think there are 2 points, and I want to hit them really quickly, because then I want to move on to how this translates to us really quickly. Why did the community view Boaz and Ruth as people of worthy character? And there's 2 ways you can look at this. You can look at it as these actions reflect their character, or it is because of their character they did these 2 actions. I think either way you want to look at it is fine. But from the community's perspective, Boaz was a person worthy of character, and Boaz says of Ruth, the community knows you're a person of worthy character for 2 reasons. Ready? Loyalty and generosity. Loyalty and generosity. Now, when I speak of loyalty, I'm not talking about blind, ignorant faith here, okay? I'm not talking about just head down, nose to the grindstone, as they say, just following along somebody because that's what you're supposed to do. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about faithfulness. I'm talking about sticking with someone or something because that's what God's called you to do. Let me give you a couple examples in our story. Ruth. Again, loyalty to who? To Naomi. Remember what we read? Your God will be my God. I'll go wherever you go. Just please don't send me away. I want to be with you. I'll change my entire life. I'll leave everything I've ever known. Think about it. I'll leave all my friends. I'll leave all my family. I'll leave all my extended family. I'll leave all my security, all my safety, everything I've ever known to go with you. And then when she gets in Bethlehem, because let's play this story out in modern day context, right? Ruth could have been a gold digger. Right? Well, I'm going to ride with her to go where she's going, and then when I find the person I need that meets my needs, I'm dropping her like a bad habit. Right? It happens, folks. Yeah, I mean, we all are. I've never seen that before. Man, come on now. Come on. Y'all probably, I mean, hey, we probably got folks in our families just like that, right? It's like, it's, we all got that one cousin that you're like, I hope nobody brings him up today. Or maybe you're not, hopefully you're not that one cousin. Anyway, right? But this happens, right? Ruth could have been that person. She could have looked at her situation and said, I ain't got a husband. I don't like any of the guys here. I grew up with them. I went to high school with them. I went to elementary school with them. I went to preschool with them. They're all ugly. I want a new start. And so she could have said, I'm going to go and I'll say whatever I need to say till we get to Bethlehem. And then I'm out of here. Because it's all about me. Ruth didn't say any of that. What did she do? She went and picked up grain for both of them. Why? Because she was loyal to Naomi. Boaz, you can look and he has the same character quality. Why? Because he is loyal to God above all else. Right? Boaz is now think about this situation, realistically. Boaz is an eligible bachelor man who obviously, he has a field and he has enough land and money to pay other people to go pick up the grain. Now he's out there because it's his grain, but he's paying other people to go do it. In that day and age, that meant you had money. So here's an eligible bachelor guy, I'm sure who everybody knows is well off monetarily, but also in character. And who does he choose to be with? The Moabite woman. Like, really? I'm sure there was the group of amazing ladies who had picked, they had known Boaz since he was yay high, and they had picked out all of their daughters to be with Boaz. And the moment he met her, you know the story, right? The gossip train starts working. I can't believe he picked her. What is he doing? If his mother only knew. His grandmother's rolling over in her. Somebody got to whoop him. That's Boaz. But what does he do? He says, no, I don't care what all the ladies say. I got to be loyal to God, and I have a responsibility. I must do this. And then you see he's ultimately loyal to Ruth as well, as the story portrays. You can read it later. But there's also generosity as well. And we've talked about generosity earlier in the year, so we won't hit this one long. But simply to say that Boaz and Ruth both show extreme generosity. Ruth to Naomi and Boaz to Ruth. And the way that they provide and care for them, that goes far above and beyond what they were called to do or would have been expected to do by everybody else. And so you see in this story that character comes out in the way that Boaz and Ruth are loyal and generous. Now, that's the easy part, right? Because y'all been here a while, y'all know what's coming next. Which is, so how does this apply to me? Right? We've already seen that the Bible calls us, just like God called Israel as a nation to be holy and to be working toward being perfect like he was, and to be a kingdom of priests. That means to show other people how they can worship the Lord and all of this stuff. God calls us to do that same thing. Remember, we just talked about what Jesus told his disciples and how the community should look at us and see us as people of great character. And in the story, character is shown through loyalty and generosity. So just for a moment, as we wrap this up, let's talk about what that looks like in our life. Now, I'm not going to say this is going to be easy, the next part, but I think it's needed, okay? So, men, since it's Mother's Day, we'll start with us. Don't worry, ladies, we got a little bit for you too. Let me ask you a few questions. Men, are you being loyal to God first and foremost? Right? Holly and I were listening to Beth Moore this morning, and she was talking about Jesus being the one and only. And I'm going to butcher this statement, because I only caught part of it. But her gist of her point was, throughout the scriptures, Jesus is to be the one and only, right? And she said, is there any, the question is, if Jesus is not your one and only, then who else is? Because if there's someone else that is your one and only, you are putting a lot of, putting a lot on him. Right? Now, Holly is my one and only wife. Hooray! Come on, you were supposed to. Yay! We'll work on that. But if I place Holly in the place of the one and only, in the place of God, then I am asking her to do things she is not qualified to do. Think about that. Men, if you're placing your wife or your job or your family or your friends or your buddies or above God, and they are in the place of your one and only, you're asking people to do things for you they are not qualified to do. And then we wonder why we're always lacking, and why we're always like, I don't feel satisfied, and I'm and I've got all this stuff, and I get more stuff, and none of this stuff. It's because you're asking people and things to do things that they're not qualified to do. So men, Are you being loyal to God above all else? I do not think we can leave this passage without asking the second question I have on here. Are you being loyal to your wife? Boaz was extremely loyal to Ruth. He did not have to be. He was not required to be, but he was. So, men, are you guarding your eyes, ears, mouth, and mind so that you're more loyal to your wife than any other person? That's right, I said person. Because your wife, you should be more loyal to your wife than anybody or bodies else. More than your kids, more than your job, more than your buddies, more than your own mom. And I love my mom dearly. But I didn't make a covenant with my mother. I made a covenant with Holly. And there's an infinite difference between the two. I love my kids dearly. And some of y'all are going to disagree with me, but you can be wrong. I love my kids. Listen, I'm not kidding. I love my kids dearly. But they do not come above Holly. Period. You may think, and I heard this around town. It's not anybody in here, so I'm not trying to. I promise I heard it somewhere in town. I can't believe she gonna put her husband in front of her kids. I was like, huh? Like what? Somebody at Walmart at the ball field. It wasn't anybody in here. But I thought, what? No wonder it ain't working out. No wonder. And if you think, you're just meddling. No, I ain't meddling. Listen, the Bible says Jesus says, man, leave your family, woman leaves your family, and they become one. It don't say, kids, leave your kids. No. Holly comes before everybody else. I'm sorry. We schedule meetings at church, just kind of giving you a little FYI. We schedule meetings around church when they work for her. And you say, boy, this is your job. Yeah, I ain't married to you. I ain't got to live with you. You don't like that? Tough. Listen, I did it all the way through youth ministry and children's ministry. We had to have meetings just like we have council every month here. And you know what I said? I asked her, before we left the meeting, when we were scheduling the next one, I would text you can ask her, I ain't lying. I would text her and say, is this a good day? And when I was really on it, I would ask her before I even went to the meeting, because I knew about the time frame, which of these 3 dates works for you? And so when we had the next meeting? When it worked for her. They didn't always work out that way. There's give and take. But why do I do that? Because I'm loyal to her. And here's what I've realized. If I don't get this relationship right, none of the other ones are going to work out. As one of my buddies in youth ministry said, here's what he said. And he was talking about all the haters, because as Taylor Swift says, haters are going to hate, right? And he said, some of y'all will get that later. You'll get it. Don't just Google it. You can watch the video. Anyway, I'm not going to sing it, by the way, so don't. But here's the idea. Here's what my youth pastor buddy, one of my dearest friends, he said, people want to give me grief about how much time I spend with my family, da-da-da-da. He said, but you know what? The one thing I've noticed, my wife and kids don't complain about it. Because at the end of the day, folks, I love y'all. Holly and I were talking about y'all have been so gracious to us, and y'all have been so good to us. And these last 2 years have been absolutely phenomenal. And we truly love you from the depths of our heart. But the biggest thing you need me to do is to get my marriage right. That is the biggest thing. And you know what the biggest thing my kids need is for them to see me love my wife. You know why? Because I don't want some scrawny kids I need to wring their neck here in a couple years because they're doing ridiculous stuff to their wife, right? They need to see me love their mom. They need to see me give her a kiss, us hug, and us fight, but fight well. They need to see that, and that's what you need as well. And so I do not think we can leave this passage, because it is in this passage and it is Mother's Day. Men, are you being loyal to your wife? It is the only relationship that you need to be concerned about the most. All the others, man, have fun with your friends. Go to football games, go to baseball games, have a good time, go to the lake. But look, do not do all of that at the detriment of the relationship with your wife. Ladies, I told you we would get to you. Not going to get out just because it's Mother's Day. I would ask you the same thing. Where is your loyalty at? Is your loyalty to God first and foremost in your life? Where's it at? Are you loyal to your husband? See this? Here we go. Run home after this one. Are you loyal to your husbands the way you want him to be loyal to you? Right? So, you know what? Let's just go here. Let's just go here. We're here. We're friends. We all love each other. This is what we're kind of times for. Like, see, a lot of ladies want their husbands to be loyal with their eyes and their ears, and they want them to be loyal to them. But then they're going to go out and watch movies like 50 Shades of Grey. It's like, you don't know what that is? Good. Don't worry about it. But it's like, you want your husband to be loyal, but then you can go out and do whatever you want to be, and it's like, no harm, no foul. That ain't how it works. You would be highly offended if your husband did something like that. I'm just saying. I don't know if you went and watched it or not. I don't care. That's between you and the Lord. I'm just saying, don't expect your husband to be unconditionally loyal to you, but then you want to have kind of a, I do whatever I want to. That ain't how it works. That's not how it works just because Travis says it ain't how it works. And that's just not, I'm not saying that to you, that's because it's just not we do. You and your husband got to figure that out. All I'm saying is, if you expect your husband to be loyal to you, but then you're not willing to be loyal to you, that's not right. Right? That's called hypocrisy, and the Bible's really big on not being a hypocrite. Right? So anyway, just a wee bit. So anyway, ladies, when you walk down the aisle all those years ago, and you were glowing and radiant, and you said I do, and he said I do, and y'all kissed, and as you ran down the aisle and all of that, you made a covenant with one person, and it was your husband. It wasn't kids, it wasn't his parents. You may not even like them, you may love them, it don't matter. You made a covenant with him, and that relationship must come above every other relationship in the world. And if it doesn't, then you and your husband need to sit down and you need to figure out why that is. And you need to work it out, because it needs to be, you need to have God, husband, wife, kids, and then everything else. And you can figure out what everything else means for you and your family, okay? But I think today we'll end with this by way of challenge. I know I've got a long way to go in being loyal and being generous. I was reminded of this last week even, that I have a long way to go, and I am nowhere near where Christ would have me to be in my loyalty and my generosity. So I am challenging myself as I do you each and every week. So this week, as we walk out of here on Mother's Day and we go home and we go, hopefully you're taking your mom out to eat dinner or you're doing whatever with family and friends, let me ask you to think about these two things by way of challenge. Here they are. Inventory your loyalty. Inventory your loyalty. Who are you most loyal to and why? Are you loyal to God? How about your spouse? And once you figure out who and why you're most loyal to them, then move in ways to be more loyal to God and to your spouse. And then the other point is, look for opportunities to be generous this week. Inventory your loyalty and move to be more loyal to God and your spouse, and look for opportunities to be generous this week. And if we do that, I just can't help but think that just as is the case with Boaz and Ruth, so will be the case with you and me and us here today. And here it is. The community will sit back and say, that person is a person of noble character. Loyalty, generosity leads to noble character. Pray with me. Lord, thank you again for meeting with us here today. And Lord, we are thankful for your grace and mercy that abounds more than we deserve or should be getting. But Lord, it is because of your grace, your amazing, unending, matchless grace, that we are all here today. And Lord, I pray that you would forgive me for the times I have not been loyal and I have not been generous. Loyal to you loyal to my family, loyal to Holly. Lord, forgive me of the times where I've not done that. Lord, forgive me for the times I have been stingy with what you've blessed me with. And Lord, may I personally go out and from this day forward be supremely loyal to you and the family that you've blessed me with above all else. And help me to be generous like you are generous to me. And Lord, help us all to do that. Lord, we all need to walk closer to you. We all need to move closer to Jesus in loyalty and in generosity. And so, Lord, I don't know what you're doing in the hearts and lives of people on this Mother's Day, but Lord, I can't help but think there's probably some of us who need to also move further down the road toward Jesus in loyalty and generosity. And so, Lord, I pray that you would move in our hearts, transform our lives. Lord, help us not to be pressed into the mold of the world, but help us to be transformed, metamorphosized into the image today, specifically today in the area of loyalty and generosity. So Lord, move in our hearts, move in our lives. Lord, may you work in a way that only you can. In your name we pray.